Hello, global gardeners. Let's get your gardening week started right by talking gardening with some fantastic gardeners from all over the world. It's so nice to be here. I look forward to this time so much. It's so nice to see a lot of the regulars and even a few new folks popping in. Today we're going to be talking about gardening from all aspects, answering your gardening questions, and trying to show you and discuss ideas to not be so stressed when it comes to gardening, because that's one of those things that I think we lose sight of. We all garden for different reasons. I end my videos, unless I let Eli do it, with always enjoy gardening. And that's how I like to approach it. We should enjoy gardening, but especially at this time of year for many of us, it's a stressful time. We're trying to get our gardens going. We're trying to make things happen. And sometimes things get in the way. Weather tends to be a big one. Pests are a big one. So how do you deal with all of that? What do you do to reduce your stress so that you can make it enjoyable and get to the point that you are gardening for the reasons you want to garden and not because of some external factor that is influencing you in an uncomfortable way? So that's what we're going to be focusing on today. In addition to all your questions, and Prepper Chris, welcome back, was asking about celery and how many times you can harvest it. Celery is one of those wonderful plants like spinach and lettuce that you can harvest over and over again. Most people will just chop the celery off and take it into the kitchen and use it. But like those other plants, you can peel off those outer stalks and the plant will continue to grow. It grows from the inside. So if you can go out and just slice off some of those outer stalks, if you're only using a few at a time, you can expect to have a harvest of celery for a few weeks, maybe more, depending on how much you're going to use. So it can be done. There is a limit because as those internal stalks are growing, the outer stalks will get tougher and they'll start losing some of their sweet flavor. The sweet flavor tends to be focused on those new young stalks that are emerging from the inside. And eventually the plant's going to get old and it's going to go into bolt and flower mode towards the end of the season. But Chris, you should be able to get a number of weeks if you're willing to just harvest one of those outer stalks at a time and enjoy your celery. And that's what many of us do with lettuce. I've got lettuce growing in my hydroponics setup right now, and I also have lettuce growing in my grow tent. And I've been doing that for days now, just harvesting some of those outer leaves, using those for whatever that salad might be for the evening, and it will continue to grow until the plant gets old and the flavor changes. And when you notice that flavor change, that's usually a good point to just harvest the whole plant and then put in more seeds or put in new transplants into that area of the bed. So Bohemian Herbology is saying the perpetual celery question answered, possible, and then going to seed still at the end. Yeah. And you know, you can have fun with it. You can buy celery from the supermarket and chop off the stalks to use and put it in water and it will grow. And you'll be able to see that in action. The outer stalks won't be growing. It'll be the internal new growth if you have fun with those kind of experiments that you can play with. So I hope that helps. Moondust is saying, I plan on combining a garden for fruits and veggies and also a garden for my herbs for my beginning crafts. Awesome. I like to set up, and you've seen in my videos, my garden is one big space, but within the garden, I have multiple smaller gardens. So I have my herb garden, and I've got my fruit garden, and I've got my veggie garden, and they are all combined within the same space to include all of the flowers that I'm growing for the beneficial insects, and of course the blackberries and the raspberries and the fruit trees and the currants and everything else. So yeah, do it all. Combine all of that within your space and enjoy it. And when we enjoy it, don't stress about it. I was looking at some of the comments that Quiet Space Arts was making from Orkney, Scotland. And so if you've seen some of Eli and Kate's videos in the last couple of weeks, they've done a garden tour. Their garden in Scotland looks fantastic. But as the Quiet Space Arts channel pointed out, they've got snow and they're expecting more snow. They're about a month behind everybody else. And it can be difficult when you're watching some of your favorite gardening channels in particular and everything is green and growing and you're not there yet. It can be stressful. I'm going through that right now. I was planning this last weekend and today to start seeds outdoors in my garden. It's been relatively warm. The soil temperature is actually working out to look like it's going to be pretty good. And then I looked at the forecast. And in a couple days, my forecast is calling for about 10 inches of snow. And I saw Colorado Bird Nerd is saying they're expecting up to 20 inches of snow. So I'm not going to be able to get my seeds started this week as I had hoped for, which now puts me at least 1 week behind my schedule, my plan. And I spent a lot of time putting together my schedule and my plan, and I'm already behind. That's the kind of thing that gardeners can really get overwhelmed by, because you put together your schedule, and this week it was going to be starting the seeds, and then next week it was going to be starting some other seeds and doing some thinning and then working on creating some new beds that I want to build. Well, now I've lost a whole week in that process. I still have all of those tasks that I want to do and less time to get them done. And here in Colorado, this is so typical. This isn't going to be our last snowstorm. We're still almost a month away from our last frost date. So there's at least one more big storm in our future, which is going to put us another week behind. And you've heard me say in videos, and when I talk about my planning and my planting, I give myself a 2-week buffer past my last frost date. One of the reasons for that is because I can expect to lose 2 weeks of working in the garden due to weather at this time of year. If I allowed myself to be overwhelmed, I would never catch up. It would be so stressful that I would be out constantly working. They're finding another chore to do. And today I want to suggest to you, you don't have to follow your schedule. You don't have to do everything that you planned. If something gets in the way, roll with it. So I don't plant as many plants on time. That may mean that what I wanted to do just doesn't get done this year. Gardening is a long-term journey. And if I can't get it done this year, well, maybe I'll get it done next year. Or maybe it just won't happen. Maybe I'll modify my plan completely. Last year, even with that 2-week buffer that I give myself, it was still so cold that I couldn't get my peppers and tomatoes in the ground for another 2 weeks. So I lost almost 3 weeks on my schedule for my tomatoes and peppers last year. I still had harvests. I had wonderful harvests of peppers and tomatoes last year. And one of the ways that you can overcome some of those kind of stressors when it comes to the plan falling apart and the weather interfering is to keep track of it. This is the experience aspect. Keep track in your notes of what's happening in your garden, and then the next year you can modify what you're doing. And one of the modifications I've done over the years is to choose the plant varieties that don't take a long time. They're easy to grow and they're fast. And so the peppers that I had such a good harvest, one of them is a variety called early jalapeno. It's a jalapeno pepper plant that doesn't take as long to fruit as other jalapeno plants. And I grow a lot of cherry tomatoes. Why? Because they're delicious, but because the cherry tomatoes are putting fruit on the plant and giving me a harvest long before some of those other bigger beefsteak tomatoes. So I don't stress at all about my peppers and tomatoes going into the garden late, because I know I'm growing quick varieties that will give me the harvests I want. I used to grow those tomatoes that took forever, and then there were the weather delays, and I would never get a harvest. So I just don't grow those anymore. It's okay to modify your plan with what you grow to match what your specific garden is giving you on a yearly basis. And so if you haven't started tracking your weather and tracking what's happening in your garden, do it. This year may be more stressful, but by doing those kind of things, next year should be less stressful. And that's what it's all about. Carla is saying, I don't have any soil for the gardens I've developed. Finances have stopped me in my tracks, so I will be slower in my process of rejuvenating this new place. Exactly. I have grand aspirations. I'm on my 5-year plan for building out my garden. This will be year 4. I have a lot planned. Finances do play a major role in your garden build out and what you're planning to do. And so I'm trying to prioritize. What's the most important thing to do in my garden in a way that I can get it done with the finances I have to get it done? And if it doesn't work this year, like Carla says, okay, fine. So we put it off till next year when we can afford it. And affording it is more than monetary. Affording it is also the time that you can devote to it. It's also the stress factor. Can you afford adding that extra stress to get something done at the expense of something else? So if you're on a limited budget and you want to add another garden bed, well, it's a balance. Are you willing to forego something else that budget money might have gone to? What's more important? What's the priority? And it's ultimately down to what makes you feel best and what you're going to get the most benefit from. And so I'm hoping that my 5-year plan really does work out to be 5 years and my garden will be done. But next year, the 5th year, if there are still projects that need to be done, I'm not going to stress about it. So my 5-year plan becomes a 6-year plan. This is a long-term journey. Gardening is a marathon, not a sprint. And please allow yourself some of that modification so that you can just enjoy it. If you're going to bang your head against the wall and work so hard to get something done, are you really going to enjoy it as much in the end as you would if you just took it a little bit slower and enjoyed the process as you were going through it? Yankee Sister Homestead, happy Monday. I've grown baby corn and sugar baby watermelon to get a harvest of some of my summer favorites. There you go. And the sugar baby watermelon it was on my list as well. I can't grow the big watermelons, but I can grow the small watermelons. That's exactly the idea. Choose those varieties that can give you the harvest and can help you out. Wormulus is saying, you're not kidding about time and finances. Between the 600 pounds of mushroom compost, the peat, the perlite, I need trellises created, a fence, more space, and I'm done digging grass. Absolutely. And that's where we get down to all the priorities of what's important and what you need to do, and don't overstress. So Mike's love for music says, I killed my seedlings with Super Thrive foliar spray, so I get set back, but the weather changed course anyways. And so that's one of the reasons I wanted to talk about this today, because I've been getting a lot of questions and I've seen a lot of comments, not just my channel, but other channels, with people right now, they're starting their seeds, the seedlings are growing, they're getting ready to transplant, and then something happens and they all die, either accidentally with a Super Thrive foliar spray, or like happened to Eli with all of her tomato seedlings, the damping off disease. There are things that will happen that can set you back. A couple years ago, I was growing the peppers from seed, and I had the small pepper seedlings, and I had used a heat mat underneath my 72 cell tray that was loaded with all those peppers. And one day, it only took one day after those seedlings were growing, that on the heat mat, I failed to water those plants on that one day. And so on the heat mat, that soil dried out and it killed everything. I had 72 pepper plants. That was going to be my entire pepper crop for the year. And by forgetting to water on that one day, I wiped everything out. Those are the kinds of things that can really make gardening overwhelming, because if you want to replace everything, you might not have time to start from seed again. If you want to replace everything and your response is to go to the nursery and buy plants, you might not be able to afford all of the plants that you need to replace everything that died. That can really put a damper on your gardening season. So what I do, I chalked it up to experience to try to never do that again. And I didn't grow peppers that year. I had a couple that were growing in separate pots, but instead of growing dozens of pepper plants as I intended, I just grew a couple because I didn't want to spend the money I needed to spend to replace everything. And I didn't want to be overstressed trying to catch up and start over and then be late putting everything in the garden. And that's why I say it's okay to modify your plan. Okay, this year I've got a great plan to grow a lot of peppers. But if something happens and I lose my peppers, well, then I won't do it this year. Next year, I'll have a plan to grow a lot of peppers. Gardening doesn't have to fit within the constraints that we often place ourselves in. It can be as flexible as you want it to be. And that's the approach I take, is just the flexibility and modifying it when I can. DLR 978 says, been there, done that. Gardener Scott lost 60 plus tomato seedlings last year, so I relied on the volunteers that sprung up in the garden. Still got enough tomatoes to over one. There you go. And it happened. If it hasn't happened to you, if you're a new gardener and you haven't lost everything yet, it's going to happen. And so be ready for that. And how are you going to adjust for it? It's the first year. It's funny that you talk about the volunteer tomatoes, because the first year that I was working at the Galileo school garden, almost 10 years ago now, we had no money. We had no seeds. I was able to get the donations to put the beds in place, and the soil was donated, and we were starting from scratch. But in the greenhouse, the previous year, some folks from the school district had grown some tomatoes. And it was sun gold tomato that they grew. They harvested most, I'm assuming, but there were quite a few of those sun gold tomatoes that had fallen into the garden beds inside the greenhouse. And so this is the first year. We really don't have much growing. We're trying to figure out what's going to happen. And I start seeing all these volunteers pop up in the garden beds in the greenhouse. Now, sun gold is a hybrid variety, which means that the fruit that those hybrid plants, or the fruit from the seeds, if you save those hybrid plants, are unknown. And I knew that it was an unknown. So I potted up all the volunteers that popped up within the garden beds inside the greenhouse. And those were the first plants I put outside, because we needed something growing outside. We needed to show the kids at the school that they could grow outside in the garden. Well, we had a ton of tomato plants, and we actually had a lot of tomatoes that appeared on those plants. Sun Gold is a light orange tomato, amazingly sweet, grows very well, but the offspring of that hybrid plant that we grew outside, they range from little red tomatoes to big red tomatoes to yellow tomatoes to orange tomatoes. It was a really great exercise to see that the genetics really aren't going to be the same if you save seed from a hybrid plant. Most of the tomatoes tasted terrible. There were a couple that were okay. None of them came close to the look or the taste of the Sun Gold tomato. But we made lemonade out of the lemons. We learned a lot about growing those plants. We learned about genetics. We had plants growing in this brand new school garden, and we looked at the bright side of it, as opposed to just becoming depressed because we didn't have any money to buy seeds and we didn't have the donations of the plants that we had hoped to get. We didn't even focus on that at all. We focused on what was happening and what we could do with what we had. And the tomato volunteers, just like you, growing those tomato volunteers was a great solution when we had no other options. So I like to look at the bright side to it, of course, and it's just a question of how much you can accept what's going wrong. Joni is saying, last year I had to start over after putting all my seedlings on a new heat mat. It burned everything. I learned to take the temperature first in a moist empty tray before putting seeds on it. There you go. That's a good lesson learned. And that's one reason why I like to talk about these kind of things. And I appreciate you all sharing your stories, because especially for the new gardeners that might be watching or listening, these are things that you can prevent. And so when we talk about the things that stress us out, the things that don't work, the things that go wrong, that somebody else is sharing, if we can learn from what that other person is sharing with us, it might help us avoid those same problems and those same stressors. And that's why I want to share with you some of the things that have happened to me. And I look forward to the rest of you sharing what's happened to you. This is a picture of my garden behind me today. This is from last year. And much of what I do in my garden is based on all of those things that went wrong in the years past that caused me excess stress. If you look over my shoulder, this white fabric that covers that whole area, and I've talked about it in a few videos, I have that whole garden space, 25 feet by 25 feet, covered with hail cloth. Because in my part of Colorado, we get a lot of hail, and I've had gardens devastated by hail. There was one year in a house I lived in not too far from where I'm at now, planted the entire garden. A hailstorm came, wiped everything out, literally knocked everything down to the ground. Every plant was broken. I started over. I bought all new plants because it was too late to start from seed, put in all new plants, not as many as I had before because, again, the budget becomes a factor, but I bought plants, put those plants in, took care of them. The garden was doing great, and another hailstorm hit and devastated everything and broke off all of those plants as well. And so a third time, I bought plants, put them in the garden, much fewer that third time around, but I did get some harvest that year. Nothing like I had anticipated. Nothing like I would have gotten if the hail hadn't hit. But I still look at that as one of my most successful gardening seasons because I didn't give up. I didn't let it overwhelm me. I figured out solutions and put those solutions in place and was able to enjoy the garden. I was able to work outside, do what I love doing, even though Mother Nature was throwing her worst at me. And I like to think that that third time, Mother Nature was smiling down and saying, okay, Scott, I'll give this one to you. I'm not going to do it a third time. And everything was great. So persevere. It's going to work out. Joni says, yes, half my garden is covered due to hail. It's a project to cover the rest. And that's why I've got these metal hoops over all of my beds. Not only to cover with plastic at this time of year when I want extra heat, or to cover with a row cover if I want to keep the insect pests out, or to cover with shade cloth if it's getting too hot, but also to cover with hail fabric if we get a big storm coming. And so I keep these metal hoops over my bed throughout the season because I never know what's going to happen that I need to respond to. And rather than worry about it, I've got the plastic and I've got the bird netting and I've got the row cover and I've got the shade cloth and I've got the hail cloth all ready to go in my shed. And I just pull out whatever's appropriate for the situation and deal with it. It's just part of normal gardening for me in Colorado if I want to get a harvest and if I want to be out in the garden. And it's not fun to be pelted by hail as you're putting up some of those covers, but it is extremely satisfying to be standing inside during a hailstorm and see that your garden is still growing, still alive, and is not being devastated by a tremendous hailstorm because you took the precautions to make sure it's all happening. Stephanie's saying, I'm planting 4 tomatoes of 4 different varieties that are heirloom. Should I plant them in a group versus a row to save seeds from them? Does that make sense? Oh yeah, it makes absolute sense. And so the idea is exactly what I was just referring to with the hybrids. If you have 2 different types of plants that will cross-pollinate each other, then the resulting seed will be a hybrid, and the hybrid will not be true to either parent. But when it comes to tomatoes, and peppers also fall into this category, as do beans, they have a type of flower that fertilizes itself. So in almost all cases, a tomato flower will fertilize itself before a bee or a fly or some other insects come in to cross-pollinate. So I grow 5 different types of tomatoes side by side and save the seed from them. And I've never had an issue with a hybrid being created because as a perfect flower that has both the male and the female parts within that flower, it's most likely to pollinate itself and it will bear true. So as long as they're heirloom tomatoes, like you say, you should be able to save the seed. If you're at all concerned about it, then you separate them and you grow 1 tomato in one bed and the other 3 in other beds, and you reduce the chance of cross-pollination because they are separated. But you really don't need to do that. There's a possibility, sure, there is a possibility that they could be cross-pollinated, but it's not likely. And one of the things that you can do if you're worried about cross-pollination is to observe when the plants are fruiting and when they're flowering and when that possibility for cross-pollination would even be present. And so I've talked about this before when it comes to the squashes and how I grow squash if I want to save the seed. I look for the flowering. And so that tomato plant that flowers first can't be cross-pollinated by another tomato plant because there's no other tomato flower that could possibly cross-pollinate it. And when that fruit develops, that's the seed you save from that plant because there's 0 chance of cross-pollination, and you can be assured that those seeds are going to be true. So it's one of those things that you can do as far as your overall season planning. If you want to save seeds from plants that might be cross-pollinated, is to look at the timing and really make note of the fruit that is least likely to be cross-pollinated, and that's the one that you save. But I don't worry about it at all with my tomatoes. And I'm growing black cherry tomatoes this year from the seed that I saved. I'm growing black Krim tomatoes from the seed that I saved. And let's see, last year, I'm trying to think of the order in my bed, I had the black Krim tomatoes, and then next to those, I think I had some sun gold tomatoes, and then next to those I had black cherry tomatoes. And I saved the black cherry seeds and I saved the black Krim seeds. And so, sure, there's a chance that they might have been cross-pollinated, but I didn't have an excess insect population that would cause that to happen in the first place. And I'm confident that the flowers fertilize themselves. I'll let you know if I'm growing those seeds and the black Krim doesn't produce a black Krim and the black cherry doesn't produce a black cherry. But my guess is you'll never hear about it again because it's all going to work out the way that it's supposed to work out. So, okay. I thought I saw a comment. I'm going to scroll back up here. There's Nick from Yuma saying, I'm getting antsy and impatient and started transplanting my seedlings, but it's still cold at night. And so, yeah, antsy, impatient. You can also chalk that up to being stressful and being a little overwhelming. And that's why I say the weather can really create issues at this time. I also, have seen some of the comments from some of you today and from others as well that you started your seeds too early and they're getting too big and you need to get them outside, but the weather isn't cooperating. Yeah, that happens. You have to accept it. You have to deal with it. Maybe next year modify your plan. Maybe the plants need extra light, they need extra water, they need extra warmth inside, and you're going to have to work harder to make that happen. Just recognize that when you can get those plants outside, it's going to be okay. You're antsy right now. You want to make it happen. So put hoops over your beds with plastic covering. That might gain you those extra couple days that you wouldn't have gained otherwise. And so it could just be 2 days, maybe 3 or 4 days. If you can get your plants in the ground just that little bit extra early, it takes away some of your stress. It takes some of your concern away, and it gets the plant started. But there's often work involved, like the covering of the plants, the preparing of the soil, and whether the weather cooperates or not, sometimes you can prevent those issues by taking those kind of precautions to get the plants in the ground. So that's an option. Melissa's wondering, can I explain cold tolerant plants? I thought my peas and asparagus would be fine, but they look terrible. Like the cold weather is making them very sad. Should I cover in Colorado Springs? That's a good question, Melissa. So yes, peas and asparagus and lettuce and spinach and turnips and beets, all of those plants are cold tolerant. And what that means is that when the weather drops down to freezing or slightly above freezing, if it's a frost, those plants aren't going to be killed. And if the weather drops below freezing, usually down to about 28 degrees, at 28 degrees Fahrenheit, that's about -2 Celsius, that's a hard freeze. At that point, you can expect some cellular damage. Some of the leaves will die, but most of those plants aren't going to be killed even during a hard freeze. The plant stays alive and it'll send up new green growth from the center of the plant. I've noticed this with my asparagus. Asparagus is a very hardy plant. It pops up and grows through snow. I've had asparagus growing in snow on a regular basis. But there is something about the weather we're having here in Colorado Springs this year. Our nights are staying cold, very cold. And so when we drop below that 28 Fahrenheit, -2 Celsius range, and we start getting down to -20 Fahrenheit or -7 Celsius, now we're talking some serious damage. Even these plants that would normally be able to handle cold can't handle the frigid conditions. And I was so happy last week. My asparagus started growing. It was emerging. And I wanted to take pictures, and I wanted to start documenting how well my asparagus was growing. Well, we've had such cold nighttime temperatures that when I went out just a few days later, all those nice little young asparagus stalks were all shriveled up. They'd been killed by the cold. And so it's a range. Even though a plant is cold hardy, and even though it can handle cold conditions, there is a limit to it. And so the reason that the asparagus grows in the snow is because the temperature of snow is freezing. It's frozen water. And so snow is 32 degrees Fahrenheit or 0 degrees Celsius. And that's nothing to these cold hardy plants. Spinach grows in snow. Radishes grow in snow. It's okay. They can handle those cold temperatures. But when it gets a dozen degrees below that Fahrenheit, you're going to see the damage. And that's probably what you're seeing is normally at this time of year for us, even here in Colorado, the nighttime temperatures are warmer than they have been. And this is why I say document it. Keep track of what's happening in your garden. And that's what I'm recognizing this year. We're still having nighttime temperatures in the teens Fahrenheit. It's still very cold, colder than normal for this time of year. And so I'm seeing damage with some of those plants that I haven't seen before, because normally the nighttime temperature is not going to expose them to those extremes. So I hope that helps, and that's what's making them look cold. Yes, you can definitely cover them. And that's one of those things where I say that extra little bit of work to get that extra bit of protection. A single layer of a plastic sheet over a hoop will gain you 3 to 4 degrees Fahrenheit. And, that's enough to make a difference. That's about 2 degrees, maybe 3 degrees Celsius that you can raise the temperature around the plant. And so if you see the temperatures dropping down into that hard freeze territory or slightly below, then you put a plastic cover over it and you can get that buffer of a couple extra degrees, and that helps keep those plants from being severely damaged. But when it gets as cold as we've been seeing here, even an extra plastic cover is not going to make much difference, because it just can't hold that much moisture in or that much heat in. And then at night when it gets super cold, there's going to be some plant damage. So it's no fun. And I'm sorry to see my asparagus damaged, because this was going to be the first year that I was going to harvest my asparagus. This is my 3rd year with the asparagus in the ground, and I was looking forward to a fantastic harvest. Well, those young spears that have started growing, I can't harvest. They're done for, which now means, depending on the next couple weeks and how good the plant grows, I may not be able to harvest as much as I had hoped for, because that first growth was killed off. Oh well, there's always next year, and hopefully next year the harvest will be better. I'm still planning on harvesting some of the asparagus, assuming our temperatures improve. And even with the snow, I love getting snow at this time of year, because the snow is an insulator. The snow is giving me 32 degrees Fahrenheit when the outside air temperature might be 18 degrees Fahrenheit. So the plant is being insulated and is growing at 32 degrees, which in a lot of these cases, especially with the asparagus, is wonderful. So that's making lemonade from lemons as well. Is even with these big snows we're getting, it's adding a lot of moisture. We've been extremely dry, and it's protecting some of those plants that need protection. So why be stressed about that? Just accept it. Understand that your calendar may be thrown off, but there's other benefits to it as well. Moon Dust says, I just looked outside and it looks like it's snowing a little. So that's that time of year for many of us. Little Rose says, is asparagus best in pot or ground with gophers? So I've grown asparagus in the ground with gophers, and I haven't had an issue with gophers eating my asparagus. They could. I'm not aware that it deters gophers in any way, but I haven't had a problem with gophers eating my asparagus. I think it's better to grow them in the ground or in a big bed, because asparagus is going to live for 20, 25, maybe even 30 years, and it's going to be gradually spreading. And every year it gets a little bit stronger. Every year it sends up more spears, and you have to wait a few years for that root development to expand through the soil before you can harvest. It's really difficult to get that in a pot. And so while asparagus can grow in a pot, you're not going to get nearly the good results that you would get if they were growing in the ground. And even in a pot, it's going to become root bound. It's going to reach a point where it's grown beyond what that pot can support, and then the plant is going to be suffering. You're going to get smaller spears and probably not as many of them. So If you grow it as a decorative plant, because once it sends up its fronds, it's a nice looking plant. You could grow it in the pot just to look nice, but if you're looking for a harvest, you really want it to be growing in the ground. Now what I did, and you can see it in my video, I've got my asparagus growing in a raised bed, and I didn't make a big point of it when I made that video, but you can see it in some of the shots I took. And that is that I dug out underneath the bed. I lined it with wire as a gopher deterrent. Then I put the bed on, covered the hole and filled the hole and filled the bed with good soil, and then put the asparagus in. So in that bed, I do have a gopher barrier that I put into place before I planted asparagus. But at my last house, I had deer and I had voles and I had gophers, and none of them ever ate the asparagus. Asparagus is kind of a stinky plant, and so I suspect that the animals would go to other plants before they would eat the asparagus. And so if you haven't done it yet and you're trying to decide where to do it, consider putting a wire barrier at the bottom and then put your bed in place and put the asparagus in, and you may see that you've got extra results or extra good results as a result of that. Pepper Chris is wondering, minus coffee, is there any other plants I can grow that are stimulants? Yeah, of course there are. It depends on what kind of stimulant you want, but there's a lot of herbs that you can grow that will give you a boost of whatever it is you're looking for. Coffee is kind of hard to grow in our garden, and it's not always the caffeine that might give you that stimulant. It's like rosemary, for instance. Some of the herbs that have that really intense flavor and aroma, I don't know if physiologically they're stimulating the system, but I know with thyme and rosemary and all those aromatic herbs I'm growing, I get the same effect. You may as well if you use fresh herbs in your cooking. It definitely stimulates your taste buds and your overall well-being. But I can't give you more specifics than that, Chris. I would say go ahead and look it up, because yes, I am aware of plants that can be grown that are used in homeopathic recipes, and also some other naturalistic medicines that do provide different benefits depending on what it is that you're trying to accomplish. So go for it. You'll just have to do a little bit more of your research yourself. Gardens Happen says the smell of rosemary can physically stimulate dogs to be more active. There you go. And that's the idea. There's a lot of plants that definitely have an effect on us and our animals as well. And so I meant to click on this one from Bohemian Herbology. Ephedra seed. Yeah, ephedra is a stimulant, and it's used in asthma and can be a natural remedy for some of those kind of issues. Do more research though before you replace a medicine or something that you might be using. But there are options out there. You just have to look into it a little bit more and make sure you're choosing the right thing. Gail from Two Gals is saying, I was amazed that my Greek oregano made it through the winter. It's now taken over 4 squares of my bed. Can it be split and transplanted? Absolutely. Oregano is one of those wonderful plants that can take over a bed if you don't dig it up and either get rid of it or transplant it someplace else. And it's extremely hardy and will come back after the winter. So it looks like you're just discovering that now. And that's actually one of the ways that I propagate my oregano, is this time of year when it's starting to emerge and it's spreading throughout the bed. If I see some growing in an area that I don't want it growing in, I dig it up and move it to a pot, move it to another bed, give it away. It's one of those plants that you can definitely move and grow in a lot of places very easily. So take advantage of that. And also recognize, this is one of those things I haven't talked a lot about when you look at your microclimates, if you've got an area of your garden that isn't as warm as another area, if it's cooler because it's lower down on the hill, or maybe it gets a little bit more shade, you can grow some of those plants that can handle the cool and cold conditions. And so oregano is one of those that I've grown in my last garden in some of those cold, shady spots that no other plant would grow in. The oregano did just fine because it can handle those cool conditions and still tastes as good, still is going to spread and give you an issue with overtaking your garden if you don't stay on top of it. Tuloco16 says, funny you mention it. I've been feeding my dog one rosemary leaf every day for allergies and itching. I haven't heard of that. Works really good. That's interesting to know. I'll have to look into that. Mala doesn't have any of those issues, but I'm growing some rosemary this year. Maybe I'll have to see how she reacts to my rosemary. And she likes chewing on a lot of other things in the garden. She doesn't chew on the aromatic herbs. And kind of like I think the typical garden pest, be it an insect or an animal, is not going to be eating your aromatic herbs because a lot of times they are too intense. And so you have to use that to your benefit if you can. If you got an area where they are eating your plants, go ahead and put in some of those aromatic herbs, and that may be enough to keep those pests away. I've got my oregano growing by my espalier apple tree, and that didn't stop Mala from chewing on my apple tree. So there are limits as to how successful that might be. You just have to be careful about the plant that you're putting in and not putting all of your eggs in a single basket thinking that that plant is going to solve your problems. It might help, but not necessarily. And so I'm still looking for that solution to keep Mala from eating my trees. Right now, the solution is bird netting, and it is working out pretty well, but I just don't like having the netting around all my plants. Though I was glad I had netting last year because the deer came in and they nibbled on all my fruit trees that didn't have bird netting around them. So if it's not a dog, it's a deer. It's one of those things we have to be careful about. And so let's go ahead. I'm scrolling up to see if I missed some other comments. Glad to have everybody here, and always nice to see what you're doing. Give me your comments, of course, if you got a question about specific plants, but also how you handle some of these concerns with being overwhelmed in the garden. And it's different times of year that we have the different things that affect us. You know, for me in the summertime, it's the extreme heat and the wind. And the plants just don't do well when it's hot and windy out. And so I stress about that. I've got to protect my plants. I've got to put the shade cloth on. I've got to figure out a way to block the wind. It happens even to the best of us. Trying to avoid being stressed, we can still get stressed. So accept that it's going to happen. You just have to be careful what you're going to do when those situations rise. Masabi Gal saying, speaking of oregano and espalier trees, I'm interested in tree guilds. Any info on that? Yeah, so tree guilds are part of the permaculture method of gardening. And the idea is, I built some tree guilds at the Galileo School Garden, and I'm in the process of developing some here in my garden. A guild is a combination of plants that you grow intentionally, usually for food production, but then there's the other components to it, like attracting the beneficial insects and benefiting the soil. And they're usually built around a tree. And so if you get a permaculture book, or if you look it up under permaculture tree guild, it's typically an apple tree that they use as an example. And so you would have an apple tree, and then around the apple tree, you think of it as planting layers of plants at different heights. And so you might have a currant bush, which is a relatively tall fruit bush, and you might have some grasses, ornamental grasses that attract some of the beneficial insects. And then below that, you would have some of the flowers and other smaller herbs that you could eat and would also be attracting insects. And then at the bottom layer, you have plants like strawberries or other ground covers that act as a living mulch in that space. And so the idea is that you just develop this symbiotic relationship with all of these plants. They're all getting sun, they're all sharing in the water, they're all giving you a harvest or some benefit. And that's really the key. You're choosing the plants to be beneficial and they're working together. It's the same basic concept of companion planting, where you put plants side by side because they will benefit each other. A guild is a series of plants, and they're all benefiting the guild. And so one plant might benefit the next to it, and that plant benefits another, and that benefits the first, and then you've got the apple tree, and you put it all together, and before you know it, you have an edible landscape, and the whole area is covered with edible plants and multiple guilds. A guild is usually seen as being relatively self-contained, and so you would have guilds that are side by side with each other, and the plants would vary depending on what you're trying to get from them. So look into that. That is one of those aspects of permaculture that I enjoy and that I do try to recreate. So because the trees take so long to grow, what I did was to start with the trees, and now I did some of it last year, I'll do some more of it this year. Now I'm adding some of those other plants around the space that I put the trees in to create a guild. And in another couple years, the whole space is going to be filled with the fruiting bushes and the flowers and all those other wonderful things. And at the school garden, what I had done is I built a space, and I think I had eight or nine of the fruit trees, and then started creating the guilds, those plants around the fruit trees, and had a path that was winding through that area to include benches. And so you'd have little seating areas near the trees, and you'd have all the flowers, and you'd see the bees and hear all the activity from the insects in the garden. And it really is a fun way to approach gardening when you think about planning to put a lot of plants together like that. It really can be a lot of fun. So Dusty Flats is saying bird netting is ranking higher with dislike than hoses for me. I have to fence everything. Don't wear buttons with bird netting. Yeah, I've had that issue where you lean in and your button snags on the bird netting and pulls it up. But there are some of those things that we just have to deal with, and I don't like the bird netting any more than you do, but it makes a difference. The trees I have look wonderful right now because the deer haven't been able to get to them at all this winter. And they're there. Was it 4 or 5 days ago in the morning, Mala goes outside, she starts barking, I look out, and she's chasing a deer out of my garden. So they're there, and it's the bird netting that's keeping my trees and some of my fruit bushes from being eaten alive. I've got to figure out a way to protect my strawberries this year because I didn't get much harvest last year. I'm protecting my trees and other fruit, but I didn't have any netting over my strawberries that are growing in raised beds, and the deer just ate them down to little nubs. So I'll be using more of the hoops, more of the netting in those areas in particular, just because I have to. Sometimes you have to do things that you don't want to do, and if you want the results you're after, like a harvest of strawberries, you just have to accept that pain. Don't let it overwhelm you. I'm not doing it yet, even though my strawberries are starting to appear. I'll get to it. It's on my list of things to do. It's a priority, but if it doesn't happen this week, it doesn't happen this week. Maybe next week. I do need to make sure I get it done within the next month before the plants are big enough that the deer will eat them. But I'll get to it. And that's how I underwhelm myself in my gardening, is I identify the tasks that need to be done and I get to it when I get to it. If I'm out in the garden and I recognize I've got a couple hours and I don't know what to do, well, then I go to my list and pick one of those tasks that is going to take less than 2 hours and I get it done. That's the way I approached my greenhouse. My greenhouse was in place all last year, but there was a lot that I needed to do in my greenhouse before it was ready to do all the planting and all the effort I wanted to do. And there were other things that had a higher priority. There were other things I had to do. So my whole greenhouse plan shifted by 6 months to a year. And it's only been the last couple weeks. You can see it in the video I did where I showed putting the water in the greenhouse. It's only been the last few weeks that I've effectively finished setting up my greenhouse. And now I'll be able to use it for hardening off and for growing and for some storage and some of the other things that I want to use my greenhouse for. I hoped to have it done this time last year. Didn't happen. It's okay. So I went a year without the greenhouse being used as much as I hoped. It's okay. It really didn't bother me. It was underwhelming that at the end of the season I hadn't grown anything in the greenhouse. I just moved it to this year. And now this year you'll be seeing a lot more videos as I start working in my greenhouse because I finally got all that done. It was delayed, but it ended up happening. So Two Gals is saying, the weather station I installed during the winter has really helped keep track of my garden. Good. It's so different than the forecasted weather and temperatures. Interesting. So I have a video that will be coming out in a couple weeks. I got a new weather station. So I did the video with the weather station last year, and I encouraged you all to get a weather station. I'm glad to hear that you did that, Gail, because it really does make a difference when you can start tracking it. The new one I have is incredible. It's got an AI system built into it, and it can actually forecast locally, like in your garden. It takes the data that it's collected and it can actually give you a short range forecast. And I don't know any other weather system in your backyard that you can set up that'll do it. So I'm really looking forward to showing you the video because it's a pretty incredible weather system that I have. And so now I've got two. I'm a weather geek. Eli and I will geek back and forth from our weather data because it does make a big difference when you can track what has happened. And now I'm really looking forward to the machine forecasting for me. And as Gail points out, so often what's happening in our garden is different than what's being forecasted by the National Weather Service, because you don't know where that station is. That station might be 20 or 30 miles away from you that is producing the forecast for your area. And as a result, the forecast that you're relying on can be off by a lot. I've found, based on my own tracking of my weather data and my forecast, I'm 2 to 3 degrees Fahrenheit off most days. And so as long as I'm aware of that, I can still look at the forecast and know what is coming, but I can also modify that for my own garden because I've learned that it's not going to be exact. So good question from BHEC1216. Are there things that I can plant now in western suburb of Denver? And so I'm not sure if you're in Littleton or which area you might be in particular. Lucky for you, you're a lower altitude than I am. This big snowstorm we're coming, I think, is supposed to produce the heavy snows above 6,000 feet elevation, and I'm guessing you're going to be below that. And so you have a lot of options. We still are getting the cold temperatures here in Colorado, and Denver is still getting cold nights. But look at those cool season plants that we were talking about. The lettuce and the spinach and the turnip and the radish and broccoli. If you're looking at brassicas and root vegetables, most of those you can go ahead and start now. That's what I was going to be starting this week, but I've been delayed, and you should be able to start growing most of those, if not all of those, now in Denver. But be ready, you might also need to put a plastic cover or a tarp for those nights that get extra cold. Just that little bit of protection on those really cold nights after the plants are growing can make a difference. The soil will still be cold. This is another aspect when you're looking at the cold temperatures and the snow and trying to figure out when you're going to grow. A warmer soil will cause the seed to germinate faster. So I could have put my seeds in this week, knowing that the snow is coming, knowing that the temperature of my soil was going to drop, and knowing that the germination was going to be much slower. A lot of those seeds I just mentioned, spinach, can germinate when the temperature of the soil is 32 degrees Fahrenheit, 0 degrees Celsius. You can have a frozen soil and a spinach seed will germinate. But it might take 6 weeks for that seed to germinate at that cold a temperature. Warm it up. If the soil is warmer, it germinates faster. If the soil temperature is 50 degrees Fahrenheit, 10 degrees Celsius, that same spinach seed might be germinating in 6 days. And so that's where the plastic comes in as well. Not only protecting the plants from the potential damage, but also warming up the soil to increase the germination rate. And so these are all the factors that you've got to play with and put together and recognize that when you keep track of germination rates and when you learn about the soil temperature, start keeping track of your soil temperature, you don't need to be as concerned when something happens like 10 inches of snow like I'm expecting, because it was going to affect it adversely anyway. I'll just modify my plan, put some plastic over those beds, warm up the soil, and I've actually been thinking about doing that today anyway. Putting the plastic over the beds before the snow comes to warm up the soil so that when the snow melts, I can go ahead and put the seeds in place because the temperatures will be warming at the same time. So lots of options, lots of ways that you can approach it, and there's lots of options for seeds that you can start. It's still too early for those of us in Colorado to put our peppers and tomatoes and eggplants and squash and melons outside. We still have at least another month to go before we can get comfortable with that. But those cool season plants, you can definitely work with that. Sherry's wondering, do you or any friends have ideas for cutting down on ticks? I can't even walk through the grass beside where I park my car without picking up at least 2 of them. Yeah, and so one of the biggest things, I don't have a tick problem here. There, up in the mountains, there's some ticks, but not much in my area. But you've identified it. It's the grass. And the ticks are going to jump from the grass to you or to the dog or to whatever's passing by. And so you got to cut the grass. That's the biggest tip I can give you. Everything I've read about controlling the ticks in your garden is keeping them away from your garden and cutting down those plants that they're going to be resting on, looking for a nice bloody meal. And that's you. So if you can, cut that grass, because that's going to cut down on the ticks. They'll, it's creating different environments for them. So you don't have to cut all the grass down. Just cut down the grass near your car or cut down the grass around your garden. Leave tall grass in other areas, and that's where the ticks are going to be, is in the tall grass. Minimize the tall grass. Don't give them a place that they can jump on you, and hopefully that'll work. And that's really one of the most effective ways to deal with ticks, is to take away their happy place, take away that tall grass. And so if you can, cut it down, and I'm guessing you'll see a big reduction in that. Jordan Marie Organics, nice to see you here, making a lot of gardening videos and then editing all the footage was adding too much stress. I've gone back to filming. I just haven't edited any of the new videos yet. There you go. That's a good solution. My son is in that same mode with his YouTube channel. He's doing a lot more filming, getting things ready to go, But the whole thing, having a job, having a family, filming, editing, doing the whole YouTube thing can be quite stressful. And so you've highlighted a good solution. You can still do what you like to do. You can still do what needs to be done, which is the filming, but you don't have to edit right now. I do that. I add extra stress to myself, and I try to reduce it because I try to get my videos out in a timely manner so that the video matches with the time of year or with what's happening right now. And sometimes I'm working very late and long hours to shoot and edit and upload and move to the next one so that they're out on time. That's all self-imposed. But like this week, I had some videos planned that I was beginning to stress over because I wasn't going to get all the shooting done and all the editing done before the storm came. So I put them off. And so if those videos come out and maybe it's a little bit late, they don't match with what everybody's actually doing, you've still got the video out. And next year, that video is more timely. And maybe people will find it at the appropriate time because you still did it, you still released it, and it's still in your library. So yeah, don't stress too much about trying to get the videos cranked out. Your videos are great. They're going to be wonderful in your library, but you don't need to stress. You're reaching that point, and check out Jordan Marie Organics because they really do have some good videos over there. But you're getting at the point, at about the 6-month point when you're serious about doing your videos, you hit that plateau and it just becomes overwhelming. It's hard. You don't know what to do next. You're not sure if you want to continue doing it. I'm guessing you have some of those thoughts. So relax, take the stress away, cut back on the videos you're doing, release them when you get to it. Again, it's all about priorities. And Jordan Marie is a much higher priority than you editing a video. So definitely focus on the other important things in life. And we'll take a look at the videos when they come out. And the timing may or may not be what you had hoped for, but that's okay. It's all good in the long run as long as you're enjoying it and continue to make those videos that the rest of us want to see in your timeline and on your schedule. That's what it is really best. Marilyn David, I have a front lawn grass. I'd like to make a flower bed. I have no idea how to start. Do I dig up the grass and put down soil and mulch and plant what grows in full sun in zone 6? So there are thousands and thousands of plants that will grow in full sun in zone 6. So there's a lot that you have options for, and just go to a local nursery and you'll be able to see all the plants that are suitable for zone 6. But one of the things you can do, and I've been working on this for a couple years, and I'm not sure when the video is going to come out. It's kind of like we were just talking about. I've been stressed about making this one particular video, and it's exactly that. It's taking lawn and turning it into a garden space. And I talked about it in a couple videos a couple years ago. And one of the things you can do is, yes, you can dig up all the grass. That's a lot of work. And that's kept me from moving into some areas that I want to reclaim. An easier method, and this is the approach I'm taking, is to cover that grass with cardboard. And then on top of the cardboard, put down your soil and your mulch. And the cardboard will it'll smother the grass underneath. Granted, there are some types of grasses like Bermuda grass that can escape and still be alive, but most of our grasses will be killed when they're smothered by cardboard. You put that soil on top of it, that weighs down the cardboard. The cardboard becomes a wonderful food for earthworms. Earthworms love the paste that they use in making cardboard. And then you cover that with mulch. And as you put your plants in, assuming, for instance, you buy some shrubs, some bushes, some potted plants, some perennial flowers in pots, the whole area is done. The grass has been killed by the cardboard and the soil and the mulch. And you just move aside the mulch, dig down through the soil. The cardboard may or may not be decomposed at that point. No big deal. You still just dig a hole, put your plant in, and you've recovered that whole area from looking like a big lawn that you obviously don't want, and becoming an area that you do like. It's work, and I've been working a little bit each year, adding more and more to it, which is why I don't have the video done yet. And I'm happy with the results. I'm happy that I've been able to kill the grass and put some plants in and have a nice landscape, and it's not lawn. And I'm saving a huge amount of water because I don't have to water the lawn. So there's some ideas. I have a video where I explain why I don't have a lawn, and I show my landscape and I explain some of those things that I've done in my landscape. That video is almost 3 years old now, I think, and it might give you some ideas of some of the things you can do. I'm in zone 5B. I'll be in zone 6 soon, and there are just so many plants that I'm growing. A lot of flowers, a lot of native plants, a lot of ornamental grasses. I've got fruit bushes. I'm growing currants in my front yard as an ornamental plant because it's just a nice looking plant. So there are lots of options to include edible plants that you can put in. So I'll let you do some research on that and look at what your local nursery has in stock, because that'll give you some ideas of maybe where you should start. Hi, Donna Stevens. Thank you for that super chat. I appreciate it. Moving July, can I still start tomatoes to move easily? Yes. If you're moving in July, I would caution you on starting your tomatoes right now. The thing about tomatoes, if you're starting them indoors, at about the 6 to 8 week point, they're going to be ready to move outside. So if you start your tomatoes right now, you're giving them all of April and all of May and all of June. You're giving them 12 weeks to grow, and they're going to be much too big to move easily. Easily being the key phrase. So if you're moving in July, I would think about starting your tomatoes in maybe the beginning of June or the end of May. Now those pots are going to have plants that are 6 to 8 inches tall and easy to move. And then when you get to your new garden, you can plop them in the ground and they'll be all ready to go. I've had that issue. I know a lot of people are facing that issue with their tomatoes where they start too early and they get to be about 2 months old and they just become overwhelming. They're too big. What are you going to do with a plant that big? So yes, you can still start, just wait a little bit more before you actually do it, and that'll be the easiest way. It's easier to move a smaller plant than it is to move a bigger plant, and you'll have more success with that as well. Lily's saying, next year I'm seeding less plants. I'm tired of watering them every day and moving them in and out of the greenhouse. Yeah, absolutely. That's another aspect. If you become overwhelmed with your gardening, cut back on your gardening. If you're spending so much time out with your chores that you're always tired, cut back on the chores. If you've got too many plants, then don't grow as many plants. Now, I agree with you, and this is the way I approach it, is that next year I will grow less. But don't lose sight of this year as well. I've done that a number of times in my gardening career where I have multiple beds and they just become too much. And so I'll pull the plants in one of those beds long before they ever reach harvest because it's just too much work. So I cut down on my workload. And I take all those plants and throw them in the compost pile, mulch over that bed, and it just stays quiet until the next year when I got more energy and more time to deal with it. So be it next year or be it this year, cut back if that makes you feel better. And if you are tired of the watering and the weeding and the pruning and the harvesting, yeah, that can be tiresome. So stop it, cut back on it, and it's all good. I think it's one of those things that if you recognize that you're gardening for yourself in most cases, and you're not having fun with it, you're stressed and overwhelmed, well, you're the one that make the decision about your garden. And if you're not enjoying it, if it's not pleasurable anymore, then cut back to that level that you are pleasured by, that you can enjoy. And it may mean killing plants. Gardeners don't like to kill plants, but it may mean that that's the solution you have to take. You have to take some plants out of your garden to reach that comfort level, to reach that point of equilibrium where you can get everything done and you can enjoy all of the aspects of the garden. And then from there, you can expand next year and get back to growing more. Or maybe not. Maybe you've discovered a new equilibrium, and that's the point you'll do from here on out. Don't feel like it's a bad thing just because you have to kill some of your garden because you overproduced and overestimated and overscheduled yourself. Karen saying, good morning in Southwest Thunder Bay. Recipient of said Colorado low, receiving most recently 12 inches of the snowman excrement. That's funny. Thanks, Karen. Yeah, we've been having so much of what's hit you in Thunder Bay actually didn't hit us. A lot of those storms have moved north of us, and we actually haven't had much here in Colorado. It's been very dry this winter because everything's been hitting the Great Lakes and moving off into the northeast of the United States. So this storm that we're getting, this gets to the point of learning your weather and tracking your weather. This system that's dumping all the snow here is actually setting up south of us. And so we have two different weather systems that set up this time of year. There's the Four Corners low and there's the Albuquerque low. And so the Four Corners are where the states of Utah and Colorado and Arizona and New Mexico meet. And that corner that they meet at, when the low pressure system hits that corner region and it's spinning counterclockwise, it actually starts drawing moisture up from the Gulf of Mexico, in addition to the moisture that's coming in from the Pacific and the cold weather that's coming down from Canada. And it just pummels this area of Colorado with all that moisture and that cold air all happening at the same time. And so that's why we're getting these big forecasts, because that low pressure is actually south of us, not to the north, with those systems that have been affecting you in Thunder Bay. And I recognize it. I saw it developing a few days ago. They were saying snow's coming. And so I was telling my family, be ready, this is going to be a big one. And they're forecasting 10 inches for me in my garden, a little bit less in some areas, a couple feet of snow in the mountains here in Colorado. So learn your weather systems and learn about those factors when different low pressure and high pressure systems set up, and that can really give you a heads up as to what's happening in your garden in the days ahead, which is why I didn't waste time. I didn't stress myself out trying to get seeds in the ground because I saw that it was coming and just wasn't worth my effort. So instead, I devoted that attention on some other things, like getting some indoor videos done, like the one that's coming up on this Thursday. I hadn't originally planned to do that video. I was just going to do the activities, not film it. And then this weather system is setting up, and I thought, well, I'm not doing the outside stuff. I'll do my inside stuff. And I started doing the inside stuff and thought I should film this and show you real time some of what I'm doing with my seeds. So you'll see that video on Thursday. And that came about purely because I was looking for a low stress solution because of what was happening outside in my garden. And you'll see in that video that it was also snowing on that day, which is why it was a good time to be inside making a video. Sally Anderson in Colorado Springs, is it a good time to direct sow strawberry seeds and asparagus seeds outside right now, or should I wait until Mother's Day to do that? You can sow the asparagus seeds. They take a while to germinate and grow. The soil's still cold. I would suggest for both the strawberry seed and the asparagus seed, sow them in little pots and get those plants started right now. and then transplant them outside. I did that with asparagus a few years back, where I treated it just like any other seedling and grew it in a pot, and then when things were warming up, I put it outside. So both asparagus and strawberry can handle cool temperatures, but putting the seed out now or even in a month, the soil's still going to be too cool for them to germinate well, and you'll get much better germination if you do it in a pot indoors. And then once those plants grow a little bit bigger, you can put them out. Now, that being said, both strawberries and asparagus do better if you plant the bare root plants. And so the nurseries will sell strawberry plants and asparagus plants as bare root plants, and you put those in the ground, and that'll gain you, depending on the age of the plant, you can buy 1 year roots or 2-year-old roots of asparagus, and that will gain you an extra 2 years of growth. So I planted 2-year-old roots and am now in my 3rd year expecting a harvest, because it takes that long for the roots to develop and to really grow strong enough that you can rob the plant of those stalks. So if you grow asparagus from seed, it's going to be 4, more likely 5 years before you're going to be harvesting that asparagus in any amount. And so you can gain yourself some time with buying the plants. And the same with the strawberries. You're adding at least a year to the time that it's going to take for that strawberry plant to flower and fruit if you grow from seed. So it's great to do. It's easy and cheap to grow strawberry and asparagus from seed, but just be aware that you're adding a lot of time to your calendar if you take that approach rather than doing the bare roots, which is really an easy way to do it. Rick is saying, like the water hose in your greenhouse. Thanks. Yeah, I've been trying to figure out the best way to add water to the greenhouse, and I came up with that retractable reel idea, and I love it too. It's making it so much easier for me to deal with the greenhouse plants, and I'll be moving a lot of my indoor plants out to the greenhouse to begin hardening off, and that water hose is ideal to be able to water everything in pots in my greenhouse. Whereas last year when I did some of that, I had the watering can and I had to fill the watering can, go out to the greenhouse, do the watering of the pots, go back, fill the watering can, go back out to the greenhouse, and now it's all in one place. So thanks, Rick. I appreciate that, because it really is, like I said in that video, it's one of the best things I ever did. And I do a lot of things in the garden that I am happy with, and the water in the greenhouse is definitely one of the things I'm most happy with these days, because it is everything I was expecting it to be. You know, sometimes you have a plan and you hope it's going to work, and then you put it in place and it doesn't work as well as you hoped it would. Well, the retractable reel in my greenhouse is everything I hoped for, and I'm extremely happy with it. So Lily's saying, can you post a link for your weather station? I can't do it right now, but you can do a quick search. Just do a search on YouTube, either on my channel for weather station, or do a search on YouTube for Gardener Scott weather station, and that'll take you to the video that I've already done. I don't have a link yet for my new weather station that I haven't done a video on, but that would be the best way, Lily, for you to find it out. Just do a quick search at the top of the screen and you'll be able to find the video I've already done for that weather station. I'll be adding the link for the new weather station here as soon as I get that video done. Probably, I'd like to get it done for next week, so maybe next Thursday that video will be coming out. Keep your fingers crossed with that, and hopefully that's when you'll see that video and that link for the new one. I'm still playing with it. I'm still learning how to use it, and so that's why there's a little bit of a delay in the video that I'll be doing and the information that I'm releasing. I'm confident that I'm going to love the weather station, but I do want to be sure, of course, before I release that. Colorado Bird Nerd, thank you for that contribution. Thank you for taking the stress off by reminding us that it's up to us how much we do each year. Oh, you're very welcome. I just moved my Forever Garden plants out a year. There you go. Exactly. The Forever Garden beds. I love my Forever Garden beds. I've got 2 videos coming out. So the video on Saturday talks about my Forever Garden beds. The video coming out, I think, next Saturday, a week from this Saturday, will be about my Forever Garden beds. And I got those beds last year, and I'm just now making the videos about them because, like you, I moved my plans. Those metal beds, I had great plans to grow a lot of plants in them, and I got overwhelmed. There was just a lot of what was happening that needed to be done, and so I just filled those beds with soil recently, and that's why you'll be seeing the videos coming up soon, because I did the same thing. So don't feel bad that sometimes you have to move your plans out. I think early last year I did a video when I first got the Forever Garden beds, the metal beds, and I talked about what I was going to be doing. None of that happened last year because things change, but it's going to be happening this year, a year later. And so thank you for that reminder for me as well, that it is one of those things. It's okay to have all those big plans, and if you move them out a year, so you move them out a year. Even someone like me on YouTube making videos, and I say to you, I'm going to be doing this thing. I get comments like that all the time in a video I've made where I say, and look for this next video, or I'm going to show you this thing, or it's coming. And then it doesn't come, and people will comment and say, where's the update? Well, sometimes the update gets pushed back 6 months or a year, sometimes more, and that just happens. I'll say I'm sorry, but it happens to all of us. It's okay to change your plans. It's okay to push it back. I love the Forever Garden beds, and I look forward to using them this year. It's just a year later than what I had originally planned. It's all good. And so Garden State Gardener says filling those beds have amazing results. Yeah. Well, and that's why I wanted to do it. It's a lot of work. But when it's all done, yeah, the results, I'm looking forward to it. Of course, you'll see that as it all happens. It's just one of those things that I wasn't ready to move all of the soil. And because as I talk in that one video I did last year where I'm using the metal beds as a visual aspect of that part of the garden. And so I wanted them to be measured perfectly level. And so it was more than just filling the bed. There was lots of extra work involved to make sure those beds were exactly where I wanted them to be. And then filled exactly the way I wanted them filled. And it still took me almost 3 days to complete that task. And I knew it was going to take a while. And that's why I put it off, was because I knew it was going to take 3 days for that task to be done. I finally had 3 days recently, and I took care of it. So it's all good. You do what you need to do. But Tina's wondering about updates for the Galileo Moon tomatoes. So I am still growing them. So Galileo Moon, for those of you that don't know, when I was at the school garden, the Galileo School of Math and Science here in Colorado Springs, I was growing literally thousands of tomato plants every year. We would have a big plant sale. That was our big fundraiser. And one year in particular with I think that year I had maybe 1,500 tomato plants. And so of those 1,500 tomato plants, there were actually 2 that were showing a genetic difference. The leaves were different. They had potato leaves instead of tomato leaves. And so I made sure I tracked those plants. I started growing those tomatoes. They did great, harvested the fruit. It was early fruit. It was delicious fruit. And so I've been saving the seeds each year of a new generation. And it usually takes at least 7 generations. That's kind of recognized to have the genetics stabilize. and I think I'm on year 5 right now. And so I am still growing the Galileo Moon tomatoes, and I'm still in that process of growing, saving the seeds, seeing how well they do in an effort to stabilize the genetics of what looks to be a genetic mutation with some of the tomatoes that I was growing. And so there's an update, and coincidentally, one of the beds, excuse me, one of the beds I'm planning on using for my Galileo Moon tomato plants are those Forever Garden metal beds. And so when you see future videos of me using the metal beds, you'll notice this year that there will be tomato plants growing in them, and those will be some of the plants that will be growing in those beds, because that's the area I've chosen to grow those particular plants. So thanks for asking that. It's funny how this all comes together with the metal beds and the Galileo tomatoes and getting back on track, because I was going to do that last year, but instead I put the Galileo Moon in my other metal bed that you'll see in the Florida Weave video. Some of those tomatoes are the Galileo Moon tomato plant that I show in that video. So wonderful, wonderful things. So Warm Fuzzy Vibe says, many events on YouTube this morning. I'm glad you are here. Well, thank you. I will always be here on Mondays if I can. I'm glad to be here too. I'm glad that I can be here for you. I hope you have a wonderful gardening week, whether it includes snow or wind or rain or heat. All of us are getting into that mode where some of the weather extremes are going to be hitting. It's snow for me. I'm going to deal with it. I'm not going to stress. I'm going to keep myself underwhelmed. And I hope you can do the same as you get into your busy garden season ahead. I will be back next week, and I look forward to seeing you here at that time. Thanks so much for joining me today, and I appreciate all of you being here for each other and for me and for the world at large, because gardeners really can make things better. I'll see you then. I'm Gardener Scott. Enjoy gardening.